everybody, and welcome back to another Jew and Gentile podcast. I am your host, Chris Katulka, and with me is none other than the Jewish sage himself, the one, the only Mr. Steve Herzig. How are you, sir?
Well, I had to ask the highball.
Okay, go ahead.
I asked the highball because I knew you would ask me that question. How am I doing? No. Put on a sweater.
That is your line. You love the sweater.
I love the sweater.
It's a warm hoodie.
A warm hoodie.
That's what you like.
No, put on a sweater.
All right, everybody. Hey, if you haven't been there yet, go to FOIEquip.org, our brand new website where you can become an equipper. That's right. FOIEquip.org. Hang on. Here we go. Steve, people are signing up from all over the place to get our free FOI Equip Equipper Pass, where they get all of the classes that we do in one place. Not only do they get the classes, the video, but they get the notes, they get the slides. It's amazing, and it's free.
Have you actually got proof to your statement? Are you seeing these people sign up?
Every day I get new people.
Well, you never tell me about it.
I told you. I said we've got hundreds of people that are logging in.
Just now. This is new news. We're supposed to prepare before we come. This is shocking to me. This is great news.
Go put on a sweater.
Got to put on a sweater. You never tell me anything.
I'm telling you right now, we've got, we just launched. We haven't really even done a hard push for it yet. And we've already got people signing up from all over. They're taking our classes. They're engaged. It's fantastic. In fact, we just wrapped up a 2-week series on anti-Semitism.
It was fantastic.
Actually, it was...
Both people did an amazing job.
David Bernstein and Tamara, I'm trying to remember her last name. She did a great job, too. David, he did such a good job, I actually turned it into a radio program because he talks about the dangers of the progressive left and the ideology that actually... the line that he had was so good. He said, it's funny, back in the day when being white was a good thing, Jews were the other. But now that whites are a bad thing, Jews are white. And so
you can't win for losing.
It's a great line. It talks about progressive anti-Semitism and where it is today. And then Tamara Behrens, that's her name. She had a great English accent, which was great.
I love that.
So if you just need an English accent, you can go watch the class
right out of London.
But she did a great job talking about the dangers of anti-Semitism on the far right. And you know what statistic she showed us that was very fascinating? She showed that, yes, there is an anti-Israel, anti-Semitic component to the far right. It's not as bad as the progressive left. But she said on the right, the people who love and support Israel and the Jewish people the most are church-going Christians. Now, if you're a right-leaning and you don't go to church, I think 66 or 67%.
It was down, actually, she said.
That's right.
So it's still over 50%. It's in the 60s. But the chances of you being pro-Israel are greater if you're an evangelical Christian.
And she considers herself a conservative and I believe works for a conservative think tank, basically. And so, she's not coming at it from an outsider. She's coming at it from an insider. And I'll be honest, too, Steve, I've been shocked. I'm on X or Twitter. I am just shocked to see, look, you can disagree with how Israel manages a war. That's no problem. But it's anti-Semitic, the kind of stuff that's coming out on the very, very far right. Nick Fuentes and all these others who really think Israel is a disgusting parasite that needs to be erased from the map. It's mind-blowing when you hear these people. And so we wanted to highlight, because anti-Semitism, there's no promise that it's based on a party or a platform. It actually is ingrained in the human heart, and it's a sin, and sin doesn't separate itself based on party.
Well, Equip, I love Equip because of the diverse subjects that we cover, and I think these two parts are really important. I thought that Mike Stollard's theology and covenant theology was really important. That's why we have it. But the next thing that comes up, I think it's the next thing, is Will Varner in Psalms.
That's right. Will Varner, not Psalms.
In Messianic something.
Yes. So we're doing a class with Will Varner, Dr. Will Varner.
Will the real Messiah please stand up?
You're the man. Good job.
I just remember what he wrote on. We used to have a brochure. Will the real Messiah please stand up?
Yeah.
And Will is going to, this is, again, all the topics that we cover, they can be accessed if you become an equipper.
That's right, for
and
free.
We believe all of those courses are important, and that's why we're offering them.
Well, this is Dr. Will Varner, who actually helped found our earliest institution called the Institute of Biblical Studies, then went on to teach at the Baster's University and has had a tenure there for decades, teaching young adults, teaching Bible college students about the importance of Israel and the Jewish people. He's a goy like me with a big Jewish heart.
Got his PhD at Dropsy University in Jewish Studies. But what's interesting, but happens all the time, I was asked to come here in 1996, and as I got here, he had already been here 10 years, so I get here and he leaves. That happens to me all the time. So I think we crossed paths in the office here maybe about 4 to 6 months, and then he said, "Steve, great seeing you. I'm leaving for California."
Yeah, I'm going to Southern California.
And I said, "Will, that happens to me all the time. I come and people leave. It's the giant exodus."
Well, listen, if you want to be a part of Will Varner's class, Will the Real Messiah Please Stand Up, July 18th and 25th, just go to foiequip.org, and there you'll see his class. And hey, look, when we talk about Will the Real Messiah Please Stand Up, we're actually talking about the fact that Jewish people have claimed many messiahs throughout history. So we believe Jesus is the Jewish Messiah, but there have been messiahs that have popped up before Jesus, after Jesus, and so Will highlights the history of Messianism.
And does a wonderful job. It's going to be a great course. You know, the thing about Jewish people is most of them, at least in the United States, I'd probably say Israel too, don't believe in a Messiah. They don't even believe in a Messiah. You'll hear them say, "Look, I hope there is, but if there was one, he would have come already." Mm-hmm. But then there's those who do believe in a Messiah, but wrongly identify them or identify him. The key is to ID the Messiah, and the Bible does that in a masterful way. And Will has just a way about him. He's taught all those years and in university level, but when he comes to Equip, Chris, it's going to, he has a great sense of humor. He's taught at, really considers himself the pastor of his Sunday school at John MacArthur's church. Mm-hmm. Well, it's the Lord Jesus' church. Yes. John MacArthur happens to pastor it. But I think it has like 300 to 500 people at that Sunday school. It's like a small church.
Yeah. So please sign up. Go to foiequip.org, and there you can be a part of the upcoming class this July 18th and 25th. Hey, Steve, you know, last week we were doing Jews with Views, and it was really interesting because people were texting me what book they would take.
And you don't even you tell me bupkis. What do I get? Nothing. Now you're telling me. So it'll be a surprise. So tell me what we're hearing from our 7 listeners.
All right. So one of our 7 listeners, Natasha, she is told us, of course, right answer, I would bring my Bible. Bada bing, bada boom. I like it. The next one, let me see if I can get this up fast enough. Oh, here we go. Hey, Chris and Steve, love your show. Love you guys in the Lord. If I was only to take one book on a desert island, it'd have to be the book of Romans, mainly because of chapter 8 and chapter 15. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. God bless you guys. That was your friend, Steve, Woody.
Oh, Woody, out of Nevada.
That's right.
Well, Woody, just so you know, Marv Rosenthal, who was the second director here at Friends of Israel, that would have been the book he would have taken. And Adrian Rogers has said if he only had one book from the Bible, it would be from the book of Romans.
Okay, here's another one. I like this. Jews with views is like Christians with positions.
That's good.
That's a good one. I like that. I take a Bible. It's instructive, inspirational, and often told in the form of ripping good stories. Ruth, Esther, Acts. Best regards from your 7th listener. Thank you very much. And then I have to say, you know, I was complaining last week. I was grumbling.
Oh, not you, Chris.
Yeah, not. I was grumbling. I was complaining about the fact that we had reached the climax of the days. Okay, of how long a day is.
Now it's by 2 minutes. It's getting less and less.
I'm already depressed thinking about it. But our good friend Pastor Neil TBA. He texted in and he said, I live for the longest day. I was sad to hear the longest day is
So
done.
you could commiserate together.
I said, I am with you 100%. So
You people are crazy. Who cares? I mean, what difference does it make?
It matters.
Unless you're in Alaska, and then where you get like 4 hours in the late fall. There's hardly any daylight. Okay, so the sun goes down at 6. Life goes on.
I know life goes on.
You got lights.
But here we are. I like the sun. I like the heat. I'm with Pastor Neil. We'll stick with that.
Well, wait a minute. It hasn't gotten any cooler, Chris.
But we're on the decline. This is it. We're down. It's all downhill from here. I already have December and January in my mind.
It's still June.
I know. I can't help myself. Hey, listen. Text us, 424-444-1948. Keep up with what's going on with the Jew and Gentile podcast. Again, text us, 424-444-1948. And Steve, we are doing the common thread. We're in Moses now. We're going to talk about Moses, how he fits in with this common thread of the promise that God made to Abraham. But before we get to Moses, you have not Jews with views now.
Nope.
But you have the Jewish encyclopedia, the newish Jewish encyclopedia.
My wife only got, she got 2 magazines where we got the Jews with views. And the other one has the question with Jews with views is on Passover. So I'll save that, Lord willing, for next year's Passover. It's irrelevant for now.
I want to see you remember that.
Dream on. The newish Jewish encyclopedia. From Abraham to Zabars and everything in between. So we looked up Moses. And according to the newish Jewish encyclopedia, Moses was a dark and complicated figure, frequently exasperated with his stiff-necked people. He must have known Chris Katulka, who's exasperated over a few minutes each day. What are you going to do?
That's enough to get me worked up.
That's right. He nonetheless persevered. Prone to tyranny, he nonetheless accepted his advisor's wise counsel and set up a representative system of government, leading his people to the cusp of Canaan, but not permitted to enter it. He became the embodiment of the sacrifices that leaders frequently must make. In an eerie turn of events, Martin Luther King Jr. delivered a speech on April 3rd, 1968, saying that he, like Moses, had been to the mountaintop and seen the promised land. And he was assassinated the following day.
Yep, he never saw it.
But that speech, Chris, I don't want to get in full-blown into it, but Martin Luther King epitomized what they're still arguing about today. He wanted to be judged not on the color of his skin, but on the merits of his character.
Content of his character.
Mm-hmm. Yes. It's just interesting to me that when we look out at the problems of it's sin, it's always sin. Whether it's anti-Semitism, whether it's being racially prejudiced against people who have a different color, it's not what Martin Luther envisioned, Martin Luther King. Anyway, I just find it interesting. 1968, 2024. Do you think we're better or worse?
I think we're better, but I don't think I think we prefer to stay. If you want to talk about being shackled to shackled to the idea of what life was like in the past, and still thinking that we're there. But I think it just shows a disregard for where we've come from.
I think people are unaware of history. Yep. I think we are better. We still have to get better anyway. You always want to get better.
My kids and I were talking about this because I watched a video, and I think this fits perfectly because it's talking about slavery. Exodus is about slavery and being liberated. And this professor got up because the whole question was, should the West pay for reparations for slavery? Yep. Mm-hmm. And this woman got up, and I said, this will be interesting to watch. And she said, in history, everybody enslaved everybody. Slavery wasn't just an issue in American culture or in the West. And she goes through this litany of examples and numbers of going back thousands of years to the Arab world enslaving certain people. Africans enslaving their own people from one to another, Europeans doing it,
There's still slavery today.
There's still, exactly. And so, but she goes, the West does itself a disservice because for thousands of years, slavery was just a part of life. I mean, it wasn't even like you'd think about having free people. You were either free or you were a Slav, you were a slave. And that was just life. Nobody questioned it. It was just what happened. The economy thrived off of it. That's what it built empires and things. They just didn't think anything of it. And then all of a sudden, a man named William Wilberforce comes along, a Christian man on biblical principles, and says this is immoral and we need to change it. And the West, the very people who almost lashed themselves publicly for the sins of the past, are the ones who actually led the way globally to end and rid slavery and to delineate between human rights, to bring human rights to individuals. And this woman who was not a white woman got up and said, we should be celebrating the West for eliminating this and bringing light to the reality of the dangers of slavery and the immorality of slavery. But instead, we're doing, we're basically punishing ourselves. And so it was just a very fascinating conversation of a woman who said, we should celebrate who we are. We did something in world history that nobody's ever done before. And we should be proud of that, not criticize ourselves. It can always get better, Steve. That's what I want to say,
100%. And if you look at the Bible, Chris, the reason a lot of people don't sign up for Jesus Christ is because they don't want to be slaves. We're supposed to voluntarily bow the knee and be a bondservant to Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. It's contrary to our nature. And we do, Western culture, at least. But you're right. That's the way the history was. But as Wilberforce followed the Word of God and dedicated his life, he was torn between clergy service and political service, and felt led of the Lord to stay in politics. And he's not given enough. Those who know about him give him great credit, but not a lot of people know about him. And he was instrumental in England first, and then the United States.
Mm-hmm. In light of this conversation on slavery, we moved to Exodus because here we are in this common thread, and the common thread is this covenant that God makes with Abraham. And the amazing thing about this covenant that goes back to Genesis 12 and Genesis 15 is that when God makes this covenant, it becomes, in technical terms, it becomes a unilateral covenant. Abraham falls asleep when God makes the deal and signs the covenant. And actually, this was the way they used to do it. When you read through Genesis 15, this was the way people made covenants in the ancient day. They would cut up animals, and then they would link arms or walk side by side next to each other as they went through the animals.
And why, though? That's the key. I always ask people when I talk about this in churches, I say, I want to see a raise of hands. Those of you who have mortgages or you're paying on time on your car, did you walk through the pieces of sacrifice, which means if you are derelict in your payment, you die.
You end up like this
Who's
cow.
buying a house? Who's buying a car where you not just give your word, you're giving your life?
No, but it's funny when you do a mortgage, it's the fine print at the bottom, which is basically saying we will take everything from you if you do not pay this mortgage back on time. But Chris,
you mentioned a very important thing, that Abraham went to sleep. God put him to sleep because only one person walked between those pieces.
And that was God.
That's right.
That's what makes it so special.
It's unconditional.
God has to fulfill this promise, which includes a land, that's Israel, which includes the Jewish people, and includes the blessing, I will bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you.
So important.
And also the blessing that through Abraham, all the families of the earth will be blessed. So there's a lot going on in this covenant, but it moves through Genesis. And just when you think, okay, I've done Genesis, the covenant, it ends in Genesis, right? Nope. What happens is, it almost seems like, what's going on with this promise? God made a great promise. He promised the Jewish people a lot of great things, but now they're slaves in Egypt.
Yeah, they went into Egypt about, 73 people, something like that. Right. And they have this promise. And all of a sudden, boy, oh boy, the Jewish people, they know how to produce.
That's And here they are. They're in Egypt. And
under Joseph, things are going very well. They have a nice life. Joseph departs, goes the way of all flesh. And there's a group who never heard of Joseph.
That's right. A Pharaoh who knew not Joseph or his family. And now they become an opportunity that could potentially create an overthrow in the government. And they go, let's enslave these people to keep them from trouble. And so the Israelites, the Hebrews, they start to develop the land of the kingdom of Egypt. I always think that's interesting. You can either develop a kingdom on earth, or you can develop the kingdom of God. And here is this amazing picture of the people that God gave a promise to develop the kingdom that he wanted them to have, land, descendants, and a blessing. And what ends up happening? They're developing the kingdom of a Pharaoh, building his pyramids, building his buildings. And finally, they're crying out. You can hear them crying. And what is going on? At 400 years, too, Steve. You think...
Yeah, it wasn't like they volunteered for this building project. Just so you know.
No, I'm not saying they did.
Yeah, somebody would hear you and say, well, look at what they're doing. They're built. They were building because they had to build.
They were slaves. They were slaves. But you begin to wonder, do you think they lost hope? I mean, America is coming up on 250 years in 2026. 250 years. And I'll be honest with you, what happened back in 1776 is like all history books to me.
That's only half the time.
That's right. It's only half the time. Could you imagine being 400 years? At some point, you probably begin to think, that was the way that our ancestors came up. That's what they did. It's not going to happen. It's all a pipe dream, blah, blah, blah. And you can almost begin to think, after so many hundred years, you begin to lose hope of a land and descendants and a blessing. You're not getting blessed. You're building somebody else's kingdom. So it's just interesting to think.
I think they lost hope, and I think they were probably looking for someone to help them, but it wasn't happening. And by the way, that's happened later on even in modern Jewish history in the last 100 years or so. The modern state of Israel, who would have ever thought that would have happened? There are Jewish people who lost hope in ever seeing that happen. That's just the way it is.
And so you get this development of a man or a baby, really, who appears on the scene.
A miracle baby.
A miracle baby who appears, is rescued, and delivered from death when he should have been.
Does God have a sense of humor, Chris?
You'd think he could just have a normal life and come up, but it's got
God has a sense of humor and such a deal. We give deals. So a baby is born. He could die because of the proclamation of killing all the male babies under 2 years old. So she hides her baby. Who finds him? The princess. And who's looking? The sister, Miriam, makes sure. And what happens? The lady who had the baby ends up getting paid to raise her baby. That is an amazing story. I think God has a great sense of humor. Think about that.
It is amazing. I never thought about that. That's amazing.
I think about it all the time. I have to I want to protect this baby. Their proclamation to kill them. I'm willing to give him up, put him in a little thatched ark.
Send him down the Nile.
Send him down the Nile. My daughter's going to follow him. Oh, she comes back. Hey, Mom. You want to take care of Moshe?
You want a job?
You could feed him for the first year in his life and get money for it.
Well, what's amazing is this: as the story develops, the very end of chapter 2 is the linchpin or the link that connects what God was doing in Genesis and pulling it forward into Exodus. Because now you're kind of in this what's going on moment. It seems like all is lost. We have the birth story and the growth of Moses. And then at the very end of chapter 2 and verse 23, it says, during that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned with their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob.
Do you think they were groaning with prayer or just groaning?
Both.
Kvetching? Exclusively kvetching or praying? It says he heard their kvetching.
Yeah. I think that they were crying out, but I definitely think they were complaining the whole time, too. How'd they end up here?
I just wonder how assimilated they became. and how dependent and how deep their roots were into the earth, as opposed to, I just wonder about that.
Well, we know that when they left Egypt, they looked back and they said, this doesn't feel like freedom when they come out into the wilderness and they've got nothing. The words are, we had leeks and garlic.
Oh,
those
still love leeks and garlic.
That's a luxury in life. And so they're saying they had some luxuries that they of course were slaves, but they still had a life. They probably sent their kids to the school. They had a way of going about life that was normal to them. But at the same time, you get out into the wilderness and you go, but wait a minute, I feel like I had it better as a slave than I do out here as a freeman.
At least we had the leeks and the garlic.
That's right. And so, but what God is doing here is he's setting up the story of Moses, because Moses will be the one to carry the promise forward. A lot of times we just think of Moses. Oh, we left Genesis. That's Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. Now we're with Moses, and he brings the law and all this. But really what Moses is doing is he's carrying that promise from Genesis 15 that God made, and he's bringing it forward. Who does Moses become? He becomes the one who frees Israel from their bondage, leads them to receive the covenant law, the Torah, that from the Lord himself. He's the one who builds the tabernacle and then begins the journey to bring them to where? The very thing that God had promised them with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the land that God gave his chosen people.
He did all that, and he also had a midlife crisis.
Go ahead.
He had a midlife crisis. 40 years old. He was, there's extra biblical writing about Moses, who was raised in Pharaoh's household, became a general. At least that's some of the things that historians have found, and identified as a son of Pharaoh. But he had a midlife crisis. Who am I? Anyway, I'm not the natural born son of Pharaoh. I know my background. And when a Egyptian and a Hebrew were fighting, Moses, in this struggle of his identity and who he is, kind of preempted God and tried to, so he identified as a Hebrew, killed the Egyptian. But then the Jewish guy was us. Who made you Lord of us, huh? Are you happy, Moses? And now Moses, I'm going to die. So he leaves. 40 years old, Chris. You're just above 40 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever had a midlife crisis?
I feel like I have a midlife crisis every day.
So you don't have a red sports car or anything?
No.
What Moses did is he went from the top of the chain to the bottom of the chain. He becomes a shepherd for 40 years, lives a life that is, no one knows about him. No one thinks about him. His people are still enslaved. Egypt is still going on. And Moses begins a family. He's a shepherd away from everything. And then God calls him. Isn't it interesting? God prepares his people for the task at hand. And in order for Moses to help his people, he didn't want Moses to do it by the flesh, by his own ability. Mm-hmm. He had to learn humility in order to lead. And that's a really important lesson for anybody involved as a parent, as a leader in a business. You have to be able to be humble before the Lord.
And this becomes the issue when it comes to humility that we get.
Oh, that he was way humble. Maybe you got the wrong person.
Well, there's that, but there's also what creates the issue that we need to talk about is because Moses is you're expecting Moses to be the one to bring the Israelites. You get this great birth story of who he is. His life develops. God remembered his promise with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which in the Hebrew, it doesn't necessarily mean to remember something doesn't mean you forgot. To remember means you're about to act. So, lest you begin to think as you're reading, oh, did God forget about his covenant? No. It's just now's the time that he's going to act. So that's when Moses comes on the scene. We have the burning bush, the call that God gives on Moses' life to go to his people, to set them free, and he's going to bring them through on dry ground. And like you said, he's humbled along the way, too, as he's leading these people. They're not the easiest people to be leading through the wilderness.
Imagine 2 million Steve Herzings. That'd be a rough deal.
I think if we had 4 more Steve Herzigs in this office,
one is more than enough. There's probably say one's too many.
Well, the point though is that we get to this moment where God is going to do something to Moses in his ministry that's going to be an interesting moment for the direction you think he's going. What you're anticipating is that Moses, if he's the guy that has this great birth story, God's covenant's going to be fulfilled. It includes a land, the descendants, and the blessing. He's going to bring them through, set them free, give them the law, move them through the wilderness, and he's going to go right into the land that God promised his people. And that doesn't happen. The people don't do exactly the thing that God wants them to do. They don't trust God. And now they're thirsty in Numbers chapter 20. And it says, in the month of the whole Israelite community arrived at the desert of Zin, they stayed at Kadesh. And there in Numbers 20, verse 1, Miriam died and was buried. Now there was no water for the community, and the people gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron. And they quarreled with Moses and said, if only we had died when our brothers fell dead before the
Sounds
Lord.
like my family.
That's right. Why did we bring the Lord's community into this wilderness that we would that we and our livestock should die here? Why would you bring us up out of Egypt to this terrible place? It has no figs, grapevines, or pomegranates. There's no water to drink. Moses and Aaron went from the assembly to the entrance to the tent of the meeting, fell down, face down, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. The Lord said to Moses, take the staff, you and your brother Aaron, gather the assembly together, speak to that rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water. You will bring water out of the rock for the community so they and their livestock can drink. So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence, just as he commanded him. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, listen, you rebels. I love this. Listen, you rebels. Must we bring you water out of this rock? Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water gushed out, and the community and their livestock drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them. These were the waters of Meribah, where the Israelites quarreled with the Lord, and where he was proved holy among them.
Boy, oh boy, Chris, you don't follow the Lord, you get in trouble. That's all. Moses had previously struck a rock and gotten water. This was the second time, and he didn't listen. And he struck the rock, and now he got service.
And the other part, too, is this goes back to, we do funny things when it says, don't take the Lord's name in vain. And, a lot of times what we do is if I hear my kids say, oh, my, God, we go, hey, don't do that. Or if you hear somebody misuse the Lord's name, the Lord Jesus' name, you kind of cringe a little bit, cringe a lot. That's not necessarily what taking the Lord's name in vain means. Actually, this is taking the Lord's name in vain. And what it means is connecting the Lord to something he didn't promise, essentially. And here is God. He says, speak to the rock. Tell the Israelites, speak to the rock and water will come out. What does Moses do? Moses, who represents God, tells off the Israelites, you rebels. Then he whacks the rock twice and water comes out.
You think he was angry a little bit?
100%. He was done. He was burnt out. But the reality is he used the Lord's name in vain. He took something that the Lord had said, do this, and he did the opposite, but he invoked God's name to the people, and the people got a misrepresentation of who God was. God didn't seem angry at the Israelites in this frustrating moment. Instead, Moses was angry, but invoked the name of God. That's why God says, you're not going in. So the thing is, this is where I have great respect for Moses. I don't know what you would do, but you lead these people out, you bring them all the way here, and your goal in your mind is to get to the promised land. You'd think God says to you, you're done. You're not going in, but you still got to bring them up, but you're not going in. What would you... I'd be going, God, is this real? What? I'm done. I quit. Here's my letter of resignation. I'm out of here. I did my best. What would you do?
Well, first of all, Moses should have, they didn't have the 24-hour rule, since email came. You know the 24-hour rule?
No.
You don't know the 24. You should learn the 24-hour rule. You get an email, and it's not nice. I mean, they lay into you like nobody's business. And you're upset. You're very upset. Wait a minute. What is going on here? Don't answer the email. The 24-hour rule.
I like this.
Wait. Kind of give it some time. When you wake up the next day, you won't be as mad as you were or angry as you were the next day, and then you answer. Moses somehow should have adopted. Look, it's frustrating. When I get up oftentimes and speak, I'll tell people, you already know my personality. I'm a stiff-necked, hard-hearted person, and that's from the inspired Word of God. So you know me. So think about managing that many people. You know the old joke that Golda Meir, or maybe it was Ben-Gurion. I think it was Ben-Gurion who, and it was Truman. And they were talking about, I'm the president of, at the time, 150 million people. And Ben-Gurion said, yeah, I'm the prime minister of 600,000 prime ministers. It's a lot more difficult.
He was taking a Moses line there.
That's a Moses line. It's tough.
Yeah.
And it's there in the text. It is hard. And in fact, we know by reading later in the story that there were a lot, anybody over 20 years old were the biggest complainers, and they were never satisfied. And that's one of the reasons they had a 11-day journey turned into 40 years.
But Moses kept going.
He did keep going.
That's where the respect that I have for him comes in, because I think a lot of people would have said, God, is this... I wanted to go into the promised land. That's what I'm here. The promise you made to Abraham, Isaac, and I did all this work, and you're telling me I can't even sit under my fig tree in the remaining years of my life in the land that you promised? And even more torturous, if this is the right word to use, is that God brings him right to the edge. When you're standing where Mount Nebo is right at the edge of the valley of the Jordan Valley. And then the Jordan Valley goes up on the other side into the land of Israel. And on the Israeli side, when you're standing near Jericho on top of the valley, you can almost see. You can see. I don't know if you can see the top of Mount Nebo, but you can see where Moses would have been. I mean, they're not that far apart from each other. Moses is given not only a sight of the promised land before he dies, he sees everything of the promised land.
I think it was a very clear day that day.
Yes.
And in fact, if you get the Common Thread workbook, is that what it's called? A workbook?
Study guide.
The pictures there. But this particular booklet, study guide, talks about that very thing where Moses is standing and looking over and seeing the promised land. And it plus with pictures. So, Chris, how does a person get this? How can they get this? This is not free.
No, this is $40 for the DVD and the study guide, and they can just go to our show notes. We have the link there. But if you take Bridges, the 9 weeks,
that's where the deal is.
Yeah, you take Bridges, you do the 9-week free Jewish ministry training, and then you become a Tikva volunteer, which means you sign up and you volunteer with Friends of Israel at any capacity that you can give. Then you will get a free digital download of the video series of Common Thread.
And what they should do, Chris, is take Bridges, get the freebie thing, become a Tikva volunteer, and use their booklet and streaming device for the Common Thread, and teach their own Common Thread in their own home. Invite some people. They can become Tikva volunteers using Friends of Israel material, and use... not from the Jew and Gentile podcast, but use from the Common Thread.
Could you imagine?
Don't teach from us, but teach from the Common Thread, which really is teaching from you.
Well,
and Dan Price, who wrote the study guide.
Yep.
And with the pictures, so that we see what Moses saw.
100%.
I think that's really well done. But you're right. But leadership like that, Chris, that's what a good leader is. He does the task, or she does the task, not counting what reward they get at the end. In other words, being in the promised land, doing the task that God called for him.
Now, here's the thing, though. You might go, okay, well, that was God's plan. The baton was handed off to Joshua. And, what you can do is you can begin to think, we've heard these lines before, you may never see the fruit of the ministry that you have, which is very, very true. But I believe that God redeems.
Are you a Gentile with a view?
I am a Gentile with a view. I'm a Christian with a, what is it? Christian with a.
Jews with views?
Somebody texted it in. Now I can't remember. A Christian with a mission or a Christian with a. I'll have to remember it. I can't remember it now. I'm a Christian with
a position.
With a position. Yes, a Christian with a position. Okay, but the point though is that you could just go, all right, yeah, I won't know the fruit of what's going on until I see the Lord Jesus, and that's true. But I want you to see how God redeems this. For Moses. Moses stood on the edge of the promised land, brought the people, did exactly what God asked. He remained obedient to God to the bitter end, brought the people right up to the edge of Mount Nebo, passes away. And then you fast forward, Moses dies. His legacy lives on. And you go all throughout the Old Testament, and then you come into the New Testament, and here is Jesus, the Messiah, the King, walking the land that Moses led the people up to. And then he does a transfiguration in front of the apostles or the disciples.
He metamorphosizes.
And it says this in Matthew chapter 17. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And he led them up to the mountain by themselves. And there he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun. His clothes became as white as light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking
in
with
the
Jesus.
promised land.
In the promised land. Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing.
That one gives me chills because here Moses could have thought Moses had that's why he's a better guy than me. He had a godly perspective on it. He knew he messed up, but he didn't complain. He kept marching the people in the direction God wanted them to go because it wasn't.
Well, we don't know if he didn't complain.
Yeah, but
God doesn't record it.
That's right. He doesn't record it for us. I like to think he didn't complain.
That's a good thing. We don't know if he did. We don't hear him complain.
That's right. Maybe under his breath.
He's a human.
I do a lot of that too.
I'm telling you, when you think about stiff-necked, hard-hearted people, I'm sure there was stuff going on in his mind.
But the thing that we're seeing with this common thread, this promise that God made to Abraham, is that you see it move from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and the sons of Israel. Then Moses is the one who carries this baton of the people going from slavery in Egypt all the way up now to Mount Nebo, and he carries that baton and passes it off. And what is the baton? The baton is the covenant that God made to Abraham. Now Jacob's job is to go in and to conquer the land and to take the land. But in the end, the beauty of it is that in the end, Moses remained obedient, completed his mission, and in the end still stood in the promised land with his Savior, Jesus.
And isn't it interesting? Peter was able to identify them.
Yes.
They knew who they were.
Do you think he was wearing a name tag?
Yeah. Chris, we talked about Jews with views last week and 2 weeks in a row we did it, and what book they would take, and one person decided to take a commentary. I remember sitting in Hebrew school talking about Moses. And when the question came, Moses said when God called him at the burning bush that he couldn't speak good, that he got the wrong guy. I can't speak well. And so God, a little not happy, said, okay, Aaron will be your spokesperson. So the question arose, what do you think was wrong with Moses? Well, the Talmud has a story. The story is when Moses was in his little basket on the Nile, taken out, and the Pharaoh's daughter found him. The Pharaoh, this is Talmudic, the Pharaoh said, wait, I don't trust this baby here. So we're going to give it a test. This baby's going to be tested. They had hot coals on one side, and they had shining gold on the other. Now, Chris, if you think of a baby, not an infant, but a baby, looking at shining gold and hot coals, what do you think naturally would take place? if they had, which one is the baby going to reach for?
Well, I think once they feel the heat of the one, they're going to definitely go for the gold.
The glittering gold. But according to the Talmud, as Moses was going to reach for the gold, God directed his hand to the coals, and he burnt his tongue, and he stuttered as a result.
Oh, really?
Now, that's a Talmudic story. And so it explains why Moses said that at the burning bush. Now, we don't have an explanation. There's extra biblical stories about it. I just find it interesting that there has to be an explanation. Here it is. Whatever the reason, whatever Moses, I just find it that that's why people like to take, well, look, I'd rather have the commentary. It has more stuff in it than what is inspired
You mean like
by God.
I'd like to think that he didn't complain the whole way up.
Well, yeah.
When in reality, he was probably like, I can't believe this is
Well,
happening.
you ready to start a Talmud?
That's right.
A Talmud of the New Testament.
I'll just make up a story. The whole book is Moses complaining under his breath.
That's
okay?
right. That's right.
That's good. All right. So, hey, listen, we're going to continue our look at the common thread. Next week, we're going to be looking at the land. The land is so important. Why did God choose that location of the world? He could have chosen anywhere, but he chose that location to give to Abraham.
And Chris, isn't it interesting that we're still, the land is under debate to this day.
Yep.
Whose land is it? We're going to settle the issue.
We'll settle the issue. That's right. So, but before we
Nobody pay attention, but we'll settle the issue.
No. They're already asleep, so it's okay. Hey, listen, Steve, you've dug up. We got to give credit to Steve Herzig here. He's our news guy. You've dug up some good ones here, Steve. Where do you want to start?
Well, let's start in a historic ruling. Chris, this is huge. This is not just a 1 week. There's news here. This is going to be an ongoing news story, because people are going to write commentary on it in Israel. It will affect here. It's going to affect everything. Chris, you and I have traveled to Israel. I've been traveling there since 1982 was my first time. And one of the things that has just characterized Israel was this distinction going all the way back to Ben Gurion, who believed it was important for prayer on behalf of Israel.
That was that's right, especially because the ultra-Orthodox community was severely affected by the Holocaust.
Exactly. And so they were exempt from service as far as the military. But from Ben Gurion's perspective, that exemption meant they were free to pray, to worship, to keep Judaism alive. As even though most of the country has historically been more secular, they acknowledged the country is under Shabbat laws, etc. So this has gone on for a long time, and the stress within the country has increased steadily, probably within the last 40 years, where Jewish Israelis go into the military and have to be conscripted into the military, except if you're ultra-Orthodox and you go to yeshiva, and the country pays for their yeshiva training. Yep. So that has made and forced a lot of Israeli citizens to be upset, but they've lived with this a long time.
Well, and they also get, when they have kids, they get money.
That's right.
They get money and money and money for having kids, too.
100%. That's a whole different story. We could talk about that. But the headline here in the Times of Israel, in historic ruling, and that is not hyperbole, it's true. The High Court says government must draft Haredi men into the IDF. That is not a 9-0 ruling of the Supreme Court of Israel has made it illegal for the ultra-Orthodox to stay away from military duty.
This is going to do so much to Israeli politics, and I think it's going to have a drastic effect.
It could cause the current government to collapse.
Yeah, but the thing too is that, all right, so we'll set it up like this. Netanyahu has played his political cards properly by wooing the religious parties to the conservative side. They're not just conservative because they are conservative individuals. It's because that's where they find their bread and butter, the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox. That's where they get the law that they don't have to serve in the military. Well, like Steve said, this has frustrated a lot of Israeli people. It's not right. They don't feel it's fair, especially as the numbers of ultra-Orthodox continue to balloon. I mean, we're talking about tens of thousands of potential adult men not in the military, especially during a time like this.
Some 63,000, the court wrote. Non-enforcement of the provisions of the security service law creates severe discrimination between those who are required to serve and those who are being exempted from Army service.
That's right. And now what's happening, though, that's interesting is that this is not a before they tried to move this in the Knesset, in the Congress, they tried to make it so that Congress would change the law. And that makes it political. And so Netanyahu would, I'm sure Netanyahu believes they should be serving too. But in order to keep his political partnerships with the ultra-Orthodox, which is a large segment of the Knesset seats, he's got to placate to them. Well, he doesn't have to placate anymore because now it's Supreme Court law. It's not a legislative issue. 9-0,
including very religious judges. There's at least 3 of those judges that are very religious, and still, in looking at the way things are, struck this down, saying this is discriminatory. Everybody must serve.
Well, and additionally, right now, in for the past 6 years or so in Israeli politics, you have conservatives that are sitting on the opposition side. So Netanyahu is a conservative. He's got the ruling party. And then you still have conservatives on the other side in opposition over this issue. They don't want to partner with Netanyahu because they want the ultra-Orthodox serving in the military, and Netanyahu wouldn't listen to them. And as a result now, you have a whole new right-wing government that could form apart from Netanyahu and apart from the religious right. Why? Because we don't have to deal with this issue anymore. This has been a huge issue for Israel. And you know what? The Supreme Court ruled.
Well, look at the smile on Lieberman's face. Lieberman is that picture says it all.
Lieberman is a secular conservative. And so he has been very frustrated with Netanyahu. He's tried to topple Netanyahu tons of times over this issue.
It's bothered him. Avigdor Lieberman, Naftali Bennett, Gideon Sa'ar, and Yossi Cohen. There's a picture of them, and this is from the Times of Israel as well. And Chris, this was just, since this ruling, they are just projecting a 75-seat majority.
That's what
a 70. Right now, I think it's 63 seats or 4 seats, something like that. And obviously, you need 61 to put a majority of parties together to agree. But they're saying if these 4 come together, that's a strong position to be in.
I'm wondering how many of them. So Likud, if the parties remain as they are today, aside from the joint labor merits ticket, the poll says the National Unity will be the largest party with 23, while Likud had 20. Likud is Netanyahu's party.
Yep.
Yesh Yatid, which is Yesh Yatid. That's I forget what his name is. He was the former prime minister as well. Yisrael Beitenu. That's
Yesh Yatid is Lapid.
Yair Lapid. That's right. And Israel Beiteinu's party, that's Avigdor Lieberman, would be up there. But if you notice, again, all of a sudden, I think the religious parties are going to be isolated because they're not going to have that power to influence over others. It's done. The Supreme Court put an end to it. So we could see a huge...
This is big news, Chris. We'll probably be talking about this for a while.
We could see a huge shift in politics, and not in a... see, when we think about huge shifts, Steve, we go between Democrats and Republicans. 2 parties, and sometimes you get a third in there, like a JFK, an independent, who comes in, messes some things up. But at the end of the day, it's Republicans, it's Democrats. In Israeli politics, when we say a huge shakeup, they're still conservative. Everybody's still conservative that would be ruling, but it's a shakeup of party alliances and who these people are who are ruling.
That's right. The politic in Israel is an interesting one, especially since our personality. We are stiff-necked and hard-hearted, and that's why a lot of things, that's what causes a lot of division within a group of people who are basically agree, which, by the way, Chris, whatever we are corporately, I always say this too at a church, whatever we are corporately, look, we wrote about sin. We are the sinners. We show sin. And so whatever we are corporately, I point to people, you are individually. So we talk about being stiff-necked and hard-hearted. We talk about division. Chris, have you ever been in a church where the people agree on the big picture? Jesus Christ came, suffered, died, rose again from the grave. We believe that he's the only way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but by him. But then the ladies want pink curtains, and the church has a conniption fit. They're fighting over. And in fact, I've been to churches where, or communities where there's First Baptist, Second Baptist, Third Baptist, and Fourth Baptist. And I'm not making this up. And I've asked them, oh yeah, this was the first one. And they don't even remember what it was. But somewhere along the line, people got upset and they moved down the street. And then they got upset. And that's why all 4 Baptist churches are from the original First Baptist.
And they're all just down the street.
They're not far from each other, but I'm not going to that place.
All right, well, listen, Steve, a place that we would like to go to, but is closing down. Hey, Pattis, New York City largest and busiest kosher bakery chain, files for bankruptcy. Steve, why did you pick this one out? That's what I want to know.
This is a part of cult. I don't know Pattis, but obviously it has been an institution as a kosher bakery. It's rough for observant Jews if you're outside of New York, it's very rough. Chicago, there's a couple places. San Francisco, at least there were. L.A. But there aren't a lot of restaurants and or bakeries that service kosher food. This was a bakery that Jewish people could count on in New York, and I chose it because that's a little bit of their memories that are no longer going to happen. Mm-hmm. And so this bakery, very famous, Pattis Bakery chain, expanding across New York like cookie dough in a warm oven, it says. But it opened up more than a dozen locations in a range of neighborhoods, gaining renown among kosher-keeping diners for its high-quality pastries, urban cafe culture, and was in talks to move into the space vacated by Russ and Daughters in the Jewish Museum. I don't even know where that is, but business hit a bump. And Chris, in the United States, business is hitting bumps.
Oh, they're hitting bumps all over the place.
Yep. Oh, it's just, interesting. San Francisco just closed its McDonald's, an iconic building. McDonald's has been there for at least 50 years, and it's closing because of money. Pattis is closing because of money.
Somewhere, this is close to home, in Philadelphia, I think either Geno's or Pat's cheesesteaks were on the news.
Oh, really?
And they were talking about how pre-pandemic you could get a cheesesteak for $8 or $9. Now it's $14.50, and the guy said the cost of the
bread,
meats,
the meat, the cheese,
oil, cheese, all of it is up. Everything's up. And he goes, I hate to do it, but it's the only way. And people come. That's an iconic location for people to go get. So I'm sure they're doing fine. But if you're a niche kosher, bakery that's high end, I'm sure.
Well, we know in New York it's about 9% Jewish. But of those 9%, most of them aren't kosher. Most of them don't follow. They're not observant. So of the 9%, there might be, 3% or 4% who are remotely religious or who keep kosher. That's rough when economic times are rough. Now it's just interesting.
Now listen, I know other places are pushing the they're trying to they have to make things more expensive. But do you know, if you want to go to a Jewish deli, you got to come with Friends of Israel on our encounter trip.
That is a great segue. Good for you.
Thank you very much. And you know what's amazing too, Steve, is that we subsidize half the trip for people to go on this thing. And so we haven't even pushed the dollar up. That's right. We want you to be able to experience the Jewish community.
It costs us every time somebody comes and encounter, it costs us money.
I'm telling you, we give it away, I mean, it's amazing.
So if somebody says, hey, can you cut me a break here on the amount of money? What do we say to them?
We've already cut you a break.
We've cut you a break.
It's amazing. So
if we cut it anymore, we'll go broke.
We have tried to keep things as low as possible so that you can come and experience a Jewish community.
Well, why? What costs us money? First of all, we rent a van.
We rent two. But we rent a van. That's
right.
We
rent a van. We take them from New York to Philadelphia. So we have to put gas in that van. Then we take them to the synagogue in Philadelphia, not just going to New York. We go to Philadelphia. We go to the JCC in Cherry Hill. We put them up in a hotel.
Yep, for 5 nights or 4 nights.
We put them in a hotel.
We go to Brooklyn. We go to New York City. You go to a deli. You go to a Jewish deli. We feed you till you can't eat anymore.
Plus, we have snacks. I have never seen so many snacks in my life.
I was just eating leftover Encounter snacks over here.
Encounter gets the best snacks I have ever seen.
So listen, wait. I know that we're guilting you into coming by saying we cover half the price.
No, we're explaining. Okay, we're just explaining.
But if you would like to, on a serious note, if you
want people.
Yeah, come. That's why we do it. We want you to experience the Jewish community, the full spectrum of it, from the ultra-Orthodox in Brooklyn down to the Reformed here in South Jersey. We want you to see it all, experience it all, and be a part of the amazing things that God's doing here at FOI. That's
Chris,
FOI.org/encounter to find out how you can get involved.
We've had pastors who said this encounter has changed the way they view things. In general, it's changed their life. Their eyes were open and their hearts became burdened for God's chosen people.
We also had somebody that said, I went on an Israel trip and it was amazing, but I came back saying something was still missing. So somebody goes to Israel and they come back and they go, something was still missing. Then they went on Encounter and they said that was the missing piece.
It all came together.
It was the people. You see the land. The land is amazing. You experience the land. But when you go on Encounter, you meet the people.
Moses' people.
Moses' people.
That's stiff-necked, hard-hearted people.
Hey, listen, we got Yiddish word of the day, Steve. Yiddish word of the day.
Okay, Chris, you found this, so you should say it. You found it.
I need to see it then. You can correct me, but okay, yes. So I was scrolling through the internet and I saw this very interesting phrase: Gezunt oft donna baya.
Try it again, Chris.
Gezunt oft donna baya. Is that right?
Yeah.
It's healthy bones, or a blessing on your bones.
A blessing on your bones. They should have done that on Fiddler on the Roof. Instead of blessing on your head, a blessing on your bones.
A blessing on your bones. And
Moses, after all, was blessed.
He was blessed.
He was blessed. We don't even know where his bones are.
That's exactly right.
But we do know that he made it.
He made it. He made it in. It was a blessing on his bones. And we pray that you have a blessing on your bones, which is a healthy life. Something Jewish people say a lot.
Gezunt. Live and be well.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for being a part of the Jew and Gentile podcast. Be sure to go to FOIEquip.org. Not only can you sign up for our class that's coming up with Dr. Will Varner, Will the Real Messiah Please Stand Up? But you can also register for Encounter, or you can even register for Bridges, our free Jewish ministry training opportunity. Hey, all of it's there for you to go to. Become an equipper, FOIEquip.org. You know what? We'll see you next week.